The fluorescent hum of the airport terminal, 3 a.m., all flights cancelled, was a constant, grating presence. It vibrated in my teeth, a physical manifestation of the utter stagnation that had become my life. Rain lashed against the reinforced glass, each gust of wind a mournful howl that seemed to mark my stalled progress. My ticket, a flimsy piece of paper promising a new beginning, lay crumpled in my hand, a useless artifact of hope. I'd been here for hours. The usual bustle of travelers had long since thinned, leaving behind a skeletal crew of weary souls and the ghosts of delayed dreams. Families huddled together, their faces etched with exhaustion, their whispered conversations swallowed by the cavernous space. I sat alone, my backpack a heavy weight at my feet, the cheap plastic seat digging into my back. My gaze drifted to the departures board, a flickering monument to my own inertia. Each cancelled flight was another nail in the coffin of my aspirations. It wasn't supposed to be like this. Just a few weeks ago, my world had been a predictable, if uninspiring, cycle of late nights at the diner, followed by early mornings spent scrubbing grease traps. My bank account was a barren wasteland, my future a hazy smudge on the horizon. Then came the letter, a thick, cream-colored envelope, addressed in an elegant, spidery script that felt impossibly old. Inside, the words spoke of a distant relative, a great aunt twice removed, someone I'd never met, who had inexplicably left me her entire estate. The estate, it stated, was a property known as Blackwood Manor. The lawyer's office had been hushed, dimly lit, smelling faintly of dust and forgotten secrets. The man, a pale, stooped figure with spectacles perched on the tip of his nose, had droned on about probate and deeds, his voice a dry rustle of parchment. But it was the will itself that held me captive. Tucked away in a separate sealed compartment, its clauses were unlike anything I'd ever encountered. It spoke of a legacy, not just of wealth, but of responsibility. It stipulated that I, Raj, must reside at Blackwood Manor for no less than 1 year. Only then would the full inheritance be released. Failure to comply, it warned, would result in the estate being forfeited to an obscure historical society. The prospect of leaving this dead-end town, of escaping the suffocating familiarity of my present, was a siren song I couldn't resist. The isolation of the manor, described in the legal documents as being deep within the secluded countryside, miles from any neighboring habitation, had initially seemed daunting. Now, trapped in this sterile purgatory of delayed travel, it felt like a sanctuary, a place where the only sound would be my own footsteps, the only gaze my own reflection, a place where I could finally breathe. A janitor, his cart rattling with the rhythm of his weary rounds, pushed a mop across the polished floor, the squeak of rubber soles echoing in the oppressive quiet. He didn't meet my eyes, his gaze fixed on the damp tile ahead. I wondered if he'd seen it all before, the shattered hopes, the desperate pleas for escape. I wondered if he'd ever felt the pull of something ancient and unknown, something promising solace and power in equal measure. My phone buzzed in my pocket, a jarring intrusion, a text message from the airline, another delay, severe weather conditions, it read, of course. The sky outside was a bruised inky black, the rain now a relentless torrent. I traced the embossed crest on the legal document detailing Blackwood Manor's property lines. A raven, its wings outstretched, clutching a single gnarled branch. It was a stark, unsettling image, but one that now held a strange fascination. The lawyer had been evasive when I'd pressed him about the manor's history, mumbling about it being a place of considerable age and largely uninhabited for decades. He'd seemed eager to finalize the paperwork, his fingers drumming an impatient tattoo on his desk. I pulled my worn jacket tighter, the cheap fabric offering little comfort. The airport terminal, 3 a.m., all flights cancelled, was a microcosm of my own suspended animation. But soon I would be on my way. Soon I would be at Blackwood Manor. I would claim my inheritance. I would escape. But as I stared out at the relentless downpour, a small, persistent question began to form in the back of my mind. What exactly was I escaping to? Rain lashed against the reinforced glass, each gust of wind a mournful howl that seemed to echo the hollowness in my chest. I'd been stuck here for hours. The digital clock above the deserted information desk, a mocking red eye blinking out the minutes. Every other passenger had eventually found a way out. A bus, a shared taxi, a desperate gamble with a stranger, but me, I had nowhere else to go. Not really. Then a voice, raspy and impossibly old, cut through the drone. "Sir, Raj." I looked up. A man, impossibly thin, stood before me. His skin was stretched taut over sharp bones, and his eyes, sunk deep in their sockets, gleamed with an unsettling intelligence. He wore a uniform I didn't recognize, a dark, ill-fitting suit with no insignia. "Yes." My voice felt thick, unused. He offered a hand, surprisingly dry. "My name is the driver, my relative." He made arrangements. My relative, a great uncle I'd never met, whose name I'd only learned from the lawyer's sterile letter. A recluse, a man of untold wealth, according to the same letter, now mine. "The mansion, arrangements?" I asked, my hand meeting his. His grip was surprisingly firm, like a vise. "Indeed, a car to take I to the estate. It is waiting." He gestured vaguely towards the exit where the rain still beat a furious rhythm. And so I found myself in a car that smelled faintly of old leather and something like damp earth. The driver, silent and unnervingly still, navigated the slick roads with a preternatural calm. The gates were wrought iron, twisted into grotesque shapes that seemed to writhe in the faint moonlight. They creaked open as if on their own, revealing a long, winding drive. And then it loomed. It wasn't just old, it was ancient, a hulking silhouette against the bruised sky. Gargoyles leered from the eaves, their stone faces eroded by centuries of weather, their expressions frozen in silent screams. The driver stopped the car at the foot of the grand stone steps. "This is it, sir." The will was quite specific. "I am to reside here." I stepped out, the air biting at my lungs. The driver didn't follow. He simply watched me, his expression unreadable. "Thank I managed," the words feeling inadequate. He gave a slight inclination of his head. "Enjoy my..." The massive oak door, scarred and pitted, loomed before me. I reached for the ornate, tarnished knocker, a grotesque face with eyes that seemed to follow my movement. The door swung inward, with a groan that seemed to emanate from the very foundations of the building. The air inside was stale, heavy with the scent of dust and decay. A grand hall stretched before me, dimly lit by a single, flickering gas lamp near the entrance. My footsteps echoed unnervingly on the marble floor. I spent the first few days in a daze, exploring the cavernous rooms, each one more dilapidated than the last. Cobwebs draped like macabre decorations, and the furniture was shrouded in white sheets, like a gathering of ghosts. The sheer scale of the place was overwhelming, a testament to a forgotten grandeur. I found a library, its shelves groaning with ancient tomes, and a ballroom, its polished floor warped and buckled. It started subtly. A door I'd closed would be found ajar. I'd dismiss it. Old houses settle, drafts are common. My imagination, fueled by isolation and the sheer strangeness of my new life, was playing tricks on me. One evening, I was in the library, trying to decipher the faded script of a particularly old-looking book. I heard a soft thud from the far end of the room, near the tall, arched window. I looked up, my heart giving a little jump. Nothing. I chalked it up to a loose floorboard, a settling beam. But then a book, one I distinctly remembered placing on the table beside me, slid from the shelf and landed on the floor with a soft thump. My hands, which had been resting on the open page, trembled. I told myself it was vibration, a slight tremor in the floor, expectant, as if the house itself was holding its breath. I was making tea, the clatter of the cups a welcome sound in the pervasive quiet. I heard a creak from the pantry, just the house, I thought. But then a low, guttural sound, like a stifled sob, drifted from within. My breath hitched. I stood frozen, the kettle whistling a shrill, piercing note. The sound didn't repeat, but the air in the kitchen seemed to grow heavy, charged with an unseen tension. I backed away slowly, leaving the kettle to shriek its lonely song. That night I lay in the enormous four-poster bed, the heavy velvet curtains drawn tight. Sleep refused to come. The house was alive with tiny noises, the groan of timbers, the rustle of something in the walls, the tap-tap-tapping of what sounded like fingernails on glass, far away. I pulled the blankets tighter, my mind racing. Was I going mad? Or was this place, this inherited tomb, truly something else? Was I the only one hearing it? The chill from the knocker seeped into my fingertips, a damp, clinging cold that no amount of rubbing could dispel. I'd expected it, of course, this place. It felt like it was perpetually holding its breath, a vast, decaying lung exhaling a perpetual sigh of frost. The will had been explicit. I had to reside here alone, for a full year before the inheritance was released. A year. The thought had seemed a challenge then, an adventure. Now standing on the threshold of this hulking, silent edifice, it felt like a sentence. I pushed the door. It groaned, a long, drawn-out shriek that echoed through the cavernous space within. Dust motes danced in the slivers of moonlight that managed to pierce the grime-caked windows. The air inside was thick, stagnant, carrying the faint, cloying scent of decay and something else. Something vaguely floral, but wrong, like wilted funeral wreaths. My footsteps on the marble floor were unnervingly loud, each click amplified, swallowed by the oppressive silence. Days blurred into a routine of exploration and growing unease. I catalogued rooms, each more disheveled than the last, filled with furniture draped in white sheets that resembled hunched, spectral figures. The portraits lining the grand staircase, their eyes all fixed on me, seemed to grow more accusami-ng with each passing hour. I tried to shake it off, telling myself it was the isolation, the sheer weight of this inheritance, the pressure of this bizarre condition. But the feeling persisted, a prickling on my skin, a sense of being watched by something ancient and hungry. My phone signal had vanished the moment I crossed the property line. The landline was dead, the wires frayed and exposed like skeletal fingers. I'd driven into the nearest town, a collection of weathered buildings clinging to the coast, hoping to find a signal, a connection to the world I'd left behind. But the town was as deserted as the house. Not a soul stirred. The shops were shuttered, their windows opaque with dust. The air hung heavy, devoid of the usual sounds of life. It was as if the entire place had simply ceased. That night, the dreams began. The image of my father's disappointed face, the echo of his voice telling me I wasn't good enough, played on repeat. Then they grew more vivid. I was a child again, lost in a maze of identical corridors, the walls closing in, the floor beneath me turning to a viscous, grasping mud. But it wasn't the physical exertion that left me breathless. It was the profound, suffocating loneliness that clung to me even after I opened my eyes. I started to hear things, a soft rustling from the floorboards above, even when I was certain I was alone. A melody, faint and mournful, played on a piano that hadn't been touched in decades, the notes drifting through the empty halls. I'd investigate, my breath catching in my throat, my hand shaking as I reached for the doorknob. One afternoon, I found myself in the library, a room dominated by towering shelves of leather-bound books. The air here was particularly thick, smelling of old paper and something metallic, like dried blood. I ran my fingers along the spines, the titles esoteric and unsettling. As I pulled out a particularly heavy tome, a small, tarnished silver locket slipped from between its pages and clattered onto the dusty floor. My heart gave a strange lurch. It was intricately engraved, depicting a weeping willow tree. I pried it open. Inside, on one side, was a faded miniature portrait of a woman with eyes eerily like my own. On the other, a single, elegant script, "My dearest Raj." Who was he, and how did she know my name? This was no mere coincidence. This was personal. I searched everywhere, turning the house upside down, my frustration mounting. Without my car, I was truly trapped. The nearest town was miles away, and even if I walked, how would I get back? The isolation was no longer a byproduct of my circumstances, it was being actively enforced. This was a cage, and the bars were being systematically put in place. I stood at the window, watching the overgrown gardens stretch out before me, a tangled, suffocating green. The sky was a bruised, heavy gray, threatening rain. I turned away from the window, the locket still clutched in my hand, its warmth a stark reminder of the intimate, terrifying connection I felt to this place. The will had promised wealth, but what was the true price? And who was willing to pay it for me? The silence in the mansion pressed in on me. It wasn't just the absence of sound. It was a heavy, expectant quiet, like the held breath before a scream. My car keys were gone, utterly, impossibly gone. I checked the pockets of every coat hanging in the dusty hall closet, rifled through the drawers of the antique desk in the study, even crawled on my hands and knees to peer under the tattered rug by the front door. Nothing. It was as if the house itself had swallowed them. The nearest town was a speck on a map I'd barely glanced at. A good 20 miles at least. Walking would take hours. And even if I made it, how would I get back? The isolation, which had felt like a quaint inconvenience just yesterday, now felt like a tightening noose. My phone, predictably, had no signal. It had been spotty since I arrived, but now it was a dead weight in my pocket. A shiver, unrelated to the chill that always seemed to permeate these old walls, traced its way down my spine. I needed to get out. I needed to see another human face, hear another voice, feel the reassuring hum of the outside world. The airport terminal, 3 a.m., all flights cancelled. That was the only thing I could think of. A place where people were supposed to be going, not stuck. Maybe the sheer absurdity of it would shake me. I found a dusty, leather-bound journal on the desk in the study. The pages were brittle, the ink faded, but the handwriting was surprisingly clear. It belonged to the relative whose name I'd barely registered, a man named Silas Blackwood. He'd been the one to leave me this inheritance. The journal wasn't a diary in the traditional sense. It was filled with observations, strange diagrams, and what looked like meticulously recorded weather patterns. But beneath the mundane entries, a disquieting undercurrent began to emerge. They bleed from the corners, from the spaces between things. I feel them watching, always watching. My fingers trembled as I turned the page. Another entry, scrawled with a frantic energy. The house remembers. It feeds on what is lost, on what is feared. What was lost, what was feared? My mind immediately went to my keys, to my isolation, to the gnawing sense of being utterly alone, trapped by a structure that felt more alive than I did. This was madness. I was letting the atmosphere of this decaying place get to me, but the words, they lingered. Silas Blackwood, my distant relative, had clearly been wrestling with something here. Something he'd documented, perhaps in a desperate attempt to understand or to warn. The thought sparked a flicker of something other than pure fear, curiosity, a dangerous writer's curiosity. I was a storyteller after all, and this house, this journal was a story begging to be unraveled. I went back to the desk, my movements more deliberate now. I needed to understand Silas. I needed to understand this house. I began sifting through the papers, finding more journals, old photographs of stern-faced people I didn't recognize, and strange, geometric sketches that seemed to pulse with an unseen energy. One sketch in particular caught my eye. It was a complex arrangement of lines and circles, with annotations in Silas's spidery script. The nexus, it was labeled, where the veil thins. The air in the room grew heavy, thick, with an almost palpable sense of anticipation. The scent of dust and decay was suddenly overlaid with something else, something metallic and faintly sweet, like old blood. There was that movement, a flicker at the edge of my vision like a moth darting past a dim lamp. I blinked and it was gone. My heart, which I'd been trying to keep steady, gave a sudden, sharp lurch. It wasn't a pounding, but a deep, resonant thrum, like a drumbeat from somewhere far below the house. I stood up, my legs feeling strangely heavy, as if I were wading through water. The silence was no longer just quiet. It was a presence, a watchful entity. I walked to the large, grimy window, the one that overlooked the overgrown grounds. The sky was a bruised purple, the last vestiges of twilight clinging to the horizon. There was no sign of life, no distant headlights, no sound of an engine. I picked up the journal again, my hands no longer trembling but steady with a grim resolve. I would read every word. I would decipher every diagram. I would find out what Silas knew. I had to. But as I settled back into the worn armchair, the faint, sweet smell returned, stronger this time. It seemed to emanate from the very walls around me. It wasn't a word, not a language I recognized, but a sound that burrowed into my ear and coiled in my gut. It was a sound of invitation, or perhaps a sound of hunger. What was it trying to tell me? The metallic tang in the air was stronger, a coppery whisper that prickled the back of my throat. I'd been trying to ignore it, to chalk it up to the house's age, its forgotten corners groaning under layers of neglect. But this was different. This was a scent that spoke of recent, visceral things. My gaze swept the room again, a vast, dusty ballroom that had once surely echoed with music and laughter. Now, only silence reigned, a suffocating blanket muffling the outside world. I told myself it was exhaustion. The relentless quiet of the mansion, broken only by the house's own phantom groans and creaks, was starting to fray my nerves. The cryptic will, the promised inheritance, the sheer isolation, it was all a potent cocktail designed to make a man question his sanity. I'd come here seeking answers, seeking the fortune my distant relative had so mysteriously left me. My breath plumed in front of me, ghostly white against the faded grandeur of the room. I hugged myself, my own skin feeling too thin, too vulnerable. Then a sound, a faint scraping noise like fingernails dragging across wood. My heart, which had been trying to keep steady, gave a frantic lurch. I told myself it was a rat or the wind whistling through a cracked pane. But the sound was too deliberate, too knowing. I took a step back, my boots crunching on fallen plaster. The sound stopped. My eyes were fixed on the corner, straining to pierce the gloom. I could feel a pressure building, a sense of being watched, not just observed, but studied, dissected. Not a lamp, not sunlight. It was a sickly, phosphorescent glow, like something bioluminescent found deep in the ocean. And then I saw it. It wasn't a thing, not a creature I could name. It was a distortion, a rent in the fabric of the room itself. Shapes writhed within it, indistinct, shifting, like smoke given form. But there was a focal point, a central mass that seemed to draw the light to absorb it. They weren't spoken, they were imprinted, seared into my consciousness. A wave of nausea washed over me, my stomach churning. This wasn't a house haunted by a ghost. This was something far older, far more insidious. The house itself, it was alive. I stumbled backward, my hand reaching for the doorframe. I snatched my hand away, my gaze falling to where my fingers had been. It smelled of that metallic sweetness, stronger now. Cloying for you, panic began to claw at my throat. I needed to run, to scream, to find help. But my legs felt heavy, rooted to the floor. The air grew thicker, harder to breathe. I remembered the cryptic clauses in the will, the ones that spoke of loyalty, of belonging, of fulfilling a legacy. I had dismissed them as archaic legal jargon. Now they felt like chains. The immense wealth, the inheritance, it was all a lure, a trap. The phosphorescent glow intensified, bathing the room in an unholy light. Countless, unblinking eyes all fixed on me. You will not leave. The certainty in that statement was absolute. It was not a threat. It was a declaration of fact. The house wasn't just a building, it was a predator, and I was its prey. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. I was trapped. The house had me, but how and why? Asterisk, asterisk. The next morning found me huddled in the grand foyer, the pale dawn light offering no solace. Sleep had been impossible. I needed to escape. I needed to contact someone, anyone, my phone, dead. The battery was completely drained despite being fully charged yesterday. Of course. I tried the landline, a relic of a bygone era, its bakelite receiver heavy in my hand. No dial tone, nothing. The windows. I rushed to the nearest one, a vast pane of stained glass depicting a scene of pastoral serenity that now felt like a cruel mockery. I grasped the heavy latch, my muscles straining. It wouldn't budge. I threw my weight against it, but it was as if it were welded shut. I tried another, then another, all sealed. The mansion was a fortress, and I was its prisoner. A strange stillness settled over the house, a quiet so profound it felt unnatural. It was the quiet before a storm, or the quiet of a tomb. I could feel the house watching me, its unseen eyes tracking my every desperate movement. It was playing with me, I realized, savoring my fear. Then a new sensation, a faint vibration originating from the floor beneath my feet. It was subtle at first, a mere tremor, but it grew, a deep, resonant hum that seemed to emanate from the very foundations of the mansion. The walls around me seemed to pulse with it, the air vibrating with an unseen energy. I looked down at my hands. They were trembling, not just from fear, but from the vibrations. The floorboards beneath my feet creaked, not with the old groans of settling wood, but with a new rhythmic sound, like a slow, deliberate heartbeat. The house was waking up, or perhaps it was finally revealing itself. What was this entity? What did it want with me? And more terrifyingly, could I ever escape its grasp? The air in the grand foyer tasted like dust and forgotten lives. I pushed myself up from the cold marble, my muscles screaming in protest. The whispers from last night still echoed, not in my ears, but somewhere deeper, a chilling resonance in my bones. I had to get out. This house, this suffocating inheritance, was slowly crushing me. My gaze swept over the cavernous space. The portraits on the walls seemed to watch me, their painted eyes following my every move. I tried to ignore them, to dismiss them as mere art, but now, in the stark morning light, their gazes felt predatory. I remembered the faint scratching sounds from behind the wallpaper in the study, the way the floorboards had groaned under my weight as if protesting my presence. This place was alive, and it didn't want me here, or perhaps it wanted me for something else entirely. My phone. I fumbled in my pocket, my fingers clumsy with a growing desperation. No signal. Of course. The landline in the study had been dead for years, its cord frayed and brittle. I'd spent hours yesterday trying to get a signal, walking the perimeter of the grounds, even climbing onto the moss-covered shed roof. Nothing. The isolation was a deliberate, suffocating blanket. I needed to reach the outside. The main gates were miles away, a long, winding drive through dense woods. Walking felt like a death sentence, a slow surrender to whatever lurked beyond the visible. I needed a faster way. Will mentioned a private airstrip somewhere on the property, a relic of my unknown relative's eccentricities. If I could find it, maybe I could signal for help. I made my way to the study, the room where the scratching had been loudest. The heavy oak door creaked open, revealing the familiar scent of old paper and something else, something metallic and faintly sweet. My eyes landed on the massive mahogany desk. It was piled high with documents, ledgers, and what looked like antique maps. I began to sift through the papers, my hands trembling. There were property deeds, stock certificates, all the promised wealth. But interspersed were other things, strange symbols drawn in faded ink, journal entries filled with rambling thoughts about celestial alignments and unseen forces, and detailed diagrams of constellations that seemed to pulse with an unsettling energy. One diagram, in particular, caught my eye. It was a crude map of the grounds, with a large X marked a significant distance from the house. Beside it, a single word scrawled in a frantic hand, "Run." A sudden gust of wind rattled the window panes, making me jump. The curtains, thick velvet that had never been opened, billowed inwards as if pushed by an unseen hand. The metallic scent intensified, acrid and cloying. I looked up at the window. It was latched from the inside. My breath hitched. The scratching. It was back, fainter now, but undeniably there. Coming from within the walls, it sounded like tiny claws, frantic and desperate. I pressed my ear against the cool plaster. The sound moved, skittering just beyond my reach. It was like being trapped with a nest of vermin, but this felt different, more purposeful. I backed away from the wall, my heart racing. There was this house feeding on those fears. I needed to leave. Now, the map, the airstrip. I grabbed the crudely drawn map, my fingers brushing against a loose floorboard near the fireplace. A section of the floor, barely noticeable, was slightly raised. My curiosity, a dangerous trait in this place, got the better of me. I knelt and pried it open. Beneath the floorboard was a small, velvet-lined compartment. Inside, nestled on faded silk, was a single, tarnished silver locket. It was intricately engraved with the same symbols I'd seen on the documents. My fingers traced the cool metal. It felt strangely familiar, like a forgotten memory. As I opened it, a faint light emanated from within. It wasn't a picture. It was a tiny, intricately carved wooden bird, its wings outstretched as if in mid-flight. As I held it, a faint, almost imperceptible hum vibrated through my palm. Then the scratching in the walls stopped. I clutched the locket, the wooden bird, a tangible piece of, what? A clue, a trap, the will promised wealth. But all I found was this unsettling history and a house that seemed to breathe with malevolence. I had to get to that airstrip. I had to escape this suffocating embrace. But as I turned towards the door, a faint melody, like a child's lullaby, drifted from the hallway. It was the tune my mother used to sing to me, a tune I hadn't heard in years, a tune that always preceded my deepest fears. The house knew. It knew my deepest fears, and it was using them against me. I stood frozen, the locket heavy in my hand, the phantom lullaby weaving its insidious magic. The windows of the airport terminal, 3 a.m., all flights cancelled, flashed in my mind, a desperate, impossible image of escape. Was there any way out of this labyrinth, or was I already a permanent resident of its decaying halls? The weight of the journal pressed into my lap, a leaden thing. Raj, that's me. Determined, they say. I felt more like a trapped animal, pacing the confines of this decaying estate. The wealth was real, I'd seen the proof, but it was a lure, a gilded cage. And the house was the jailer. The cryptic symbols, the ramblings of a mind I couldn't fathom, they were echoes of something dark that had festered here. I slammed the journal shut. The sound was swallowed by the vast silence of the study. My breath hitched. There was that a floorboard creaking upstairs. I strained my ears, but heard only the frantic thumping of my own pulse. This place played tricks. It warped the air, twisted sounds. I needed out, not just out of this room, but out of this house. The will mentioned a final testament, a hidden cache of jewels, and a specific instruction: only when the moon weeps will the true inheritance be revealed. Moon weeps? What kind of nonsense was that? My gaze fell on a faded photograph on the mantelpiece. A stern-faced woman, her eyes sharp and unforgiving. My great-aunt, I presumed, the one who'd left me this monstrosity. Her lips seemed to curl into a sneer, as if she knew my current predicament, as if she'd orchestrated it. A sudden gust of wind rattled the ancient panes of the study window, a mournful howl that seemed to seep through the very stone. The air grew heavy, thick with an unseen presence. My skin prickled. I stood, my legs unsteady. I had to get to the source. The journal spoke of a heart to the house, a place where its influence was strongest. I left the study, the faint glow of my lantern doing little to push back the encroaching gloom. Each step echoed unnervingly on the polished wood of the grand staircase. The portraits lining the walls seemed to watch me, their painted eyes following my descent. I felt a profound sense of being scrutinized, judged. Down in the main hall, the temperature plummeted. My breath plumed in the frigid air. A faint metallic tang like old blood now permeated the musty scent of decay. It had been locked, but now it was ajar. A sliver of absolute blackness beckoned. I flinched back. No, this was just the house playing its games. I approached the cellar door, the wood groaning as if in pain. A faint, rhythmic dripping sound echoed from within, a slow, deliberate beat that hammered against my nerves. Drip. It was the sound of time itself bleeding away. Or perhaps something far more sinister. Taking a deep, shaky breath, I pushed the door open further. The air that rushed out was thick with the stench of damp earth and something else, something sickly sweet like rotting flowers. It clawed at my throat, making me gag. The dripping sound was louder now, more insistent. I stepped onto the first stone stair, the lantern held out before me. The walls were slick with a viscous moisture that gleamed faintly. My boots skidded on something soft and yielding. I jerked my foot back, a choked gasp escaping my lips. What had I stepped on? The dripping intensified, a frenzied cascade now, as if a ruptured pipe had burst open. But it wasn't water. The sound was too thick, too viscous. My lantern beam flickered, threatening to die. I took another step down, then another. The air grew heavier, the sweet, cloying scent overpowering. There were those shapes moving in the periphery. I blinked, trying to clear my sight. The dripping sound was deafening now, a frantic percussion that seemed to pulse with a life of its own. And then, through the cacophony of drips, I heard it, a low, guttural hum. It vibrated through the stone beneath my feet, through the very marrow of my bones. It was a sound that felt ancient, primal, and utterly wrong. It spoke of things that should not be. My lantern sputtered, the flame shrinking to a tiny, defiant spark. I was blind. Dripping and the humming continued, closer now, surrounding me. I could feel a subtle shift in the air, a disturbance that suggested movement. Something was here with me in the black. I stumbled backward, my hands flailing, searching for the stairs for an escape. It wasn't stone, it felt yielding. It was too faint to make out words, but the intent was unmistakable. It was hungry. The journal lay open, its brittle pages whispering secrets I was no longer sure I wanted to hear. Raj, that's me, and the house. The last entry, scrawled in a hand that trembled with an ancient terror, spoke of a breach of thinning veils. I dismissed it as the ramblings of a madman, but now the dust motes dancing in the weak sunlight seemed to pulse with a life of their own. A low hum like distant thunder vibrated through the floorboards. It wasn't thunder. It was inside. I needed to leave. The thought had been a constant thrum beneath my skin for days, growing louder with each creak of the manor's ancient bones, each phantom scent of damp earth and decay that clung to the air. My car keys were in my pocket, a small comfort, a tangible link to the world beyond these suffocating walls, but the will with its impossible promises held me captive. It spoke of a final test, a purification I hadn't understood. Now the humming intensified, a deep resonance that made my teeth ache. The air grew heavy, thick with an unseen pressure. I saw it then, a flicker in my peripheral vision, a distortion in the air like heat rising from asphalt. It coalesced, taking on a vague, shifting form, not human, not animal, but something that felt like both and neither. It was the house, I realized with a sickening lurch. The house given a semblance of form. It fed on fear, on loneliness, on me. My breath hitched. My hands, I noticed, were clenched into fists, the grip tight. The hum was now a guttural growl, emanating from everywhere and nowhere at once. I backed away, my boots scraping on the polished, yet grimy wood. The grandfather clock in the hall, its pendulum long since stilled, chimed once. A single, discordant note that echoed the shattering of my resolve. I spun around, searching for an exit, any exit. The massive oak front doors, always so imposing, now seemed impossibly far away, their brass handle glinting like a mocking eye. A distorted shape in the hall stretched, elongating, its edges blurring into the encroaching gloom. It wasn't just in the hall anymore. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. I stumbled, catching myself on a dusty mahogany table. The scent of old paper and something else, something acrid and metallic, filled my nostrils. It was drawing closer. I could feel its gaze, though it had no eyes. This was not a test of courage. It was a test of survival. I scrambled towards the kitchen, the familiar layout now alien and menacing. The humming followed, a relentless pursuit. The pantry door creaked open on its own. A gust of stale air, smelling of rot and something sickly sweet, spilled out. Inside, the shelves were empty, save for a single tarnished silver locket. I remembered seeing it in a faded photograph in the journal, clutched in the hand of a woman with eyes like mine. The woman who had built this place. The woman who had invited it in. It filled the frame, blocking my escape. The growl deepened, a sound that seemed to claw at my very soul. I could feel my own strength ebbing, my will faltering. The wealth, the will, it was all a fabrication, a distraction from the true purpose of this place. It wanted to consume me, to add my essence to its own endless hunger. My gaze fell on the old cast-iron stove, but something about it. The journal had mentioned hearth, embers, memory. Was this what it meant? A place of warmth, of life, now twisted into something else. The entity recoiled slightly as I stepped towards it, a hiss escaping its form. It didn't like the stove. It didn't like the faint, lingering memory of human presence. A desperate idea formed. The journal, the locket, the stove, these were anchors, fragments of the past. Perhaps I could fill it, not with my fear, but with something it couldn't digest. Something mine. I fumbled in my pocket, my fingers finding the smooth, cool surface of my own worn silver pocket watch, a gift from my grandfather. The entity surged forward, its form rippling with a palpable hunger. The humming reached a crescendo. Was this how it ended, absorbed into the suffocating embrace of this thing? Or could a memory, a connection, a simple act of defiance be enough to make it? Pause. The chill was a physical thing, a damp shroud clinging to my skin. It wasn't the cold of winter, but a deeper, more primal cold, the kind that seeped from ancient stone and festered in forgotten corners. I'd been running, I think, though the memory of it was like trying to grasp smoke. The distorted shape, it had been in asterisk me, hadn't it? I found myself standing, or rather slumped, against a wall. The air tasted of stale exhaust fumes and something metallic, like old pennies. My eyes, adjusting to the dim, flickering fluorescent lights, took in the scene. Rows of empty plastic chairs stretched out before me, a silent, waiting congregation. A digital clock above a deserted information desk read 3:07 a.m. The departure boards, usually a frantic cascade of destinations, were stark white screens, each displaying a single damning phrase: all flights cancelled. This was the airport terminal, 3 a.m., all flights cancelled. A purgatory of delayed journeys and broken plans. But the air here, though sterile, felt cleaner. My hands trembled as I touched my face. My skin felt taut, stretched thin over bone. But here, in this vast, empty space, it was gone, or at least it felt gone. The sheer banality of the surroundings, the utter lack of anything remotely supernatural, was a balm. I pushed myself away from the wall, my legs stiff and unsteady. Each movement was a conscious effort, as if my body was still resisting the unseen forces that had held me captive. I walked, my footsteps echoing unnervingly in the cavernous space. Just an empty building. I reached the main concourse. Beyond them, only an inky blackness stretched, swallowing the world. It felt like the end of everything, but also, strangely, a beginning. Raj. The name felt foreign on my tongue, a label I was only just reacquainting myself with. I had been Raj, yes, but that Raj had been consumed, eroded by the house. This Raj, the one standing in the quiet desolation of the airport terminal, was a survivor. Scarred, undoubtedly, changed irrevocably, but a survivor. The will, the promise of wealth. It all felt like a cruel joke now. The true inheritance wasn't gold or jewels, it was the lesson, but in the end it hadn't broken me. It had shown me the resilience I never knew I possessed. I had seen it, understood it. It wasn't an external entity, not entirely. It was a mirror, a manifestation of the rot that can fester within us, given shape by the ancient, hungry spirit of Blackwood Manor. And in that moment of terrified clarity, I had refused to feed it. I had refused to let it consume me. I had pushed back, not with force but with acceptance, with a desperate primal refusal to be defined by my fear. They were still trembling, but less violently now. The skin was pale, almost translucent, and I noticed a faint, almost imperceptible tremor that ran through them. A residual effect, I told myself, a ghost of the house's touch. I continued to walk, drawn by an instinct I couldn't explain, towards the deserted check-in counters, the silent baggage carousels. Each step felt like a victory, a reclaiming of my own existence. The silence was no longer menacing, but peaceful. A picture of a sun-drenched beach, a place of pure escape. For a fleeting second, the image shimmered, distorted. The bright sun replaced by a sickly, greenish glow. The cheerful waves turned into grasping tendrils. My breath hitched. It was gone as quickly as it appeared. Just a trick of the light, I told myself, my heart racing, just my mind playing tricks. Blackwood Manor was gone, or at least I had fled it. But had it truly let me go? There was this quiet, empty airport terminal truly a sanctuary, or just another gilded cage, waiting for its true nature to reveal itself? The question hung in the air, heavy and unanswered, like the cancelled flights that would never depart.